Ladies and gentlemen,
Oh, hand mic.
some years ago, Baz Luhrmann was born in a small town, Herons Creek, New South Wales, Australia. His father ran a cinema, and Baz fell in love with movies, opera, and music as a young man. As he grew into an artist, he has become one of the world's leading cinema stylists with original works and brilliant reinterpretations of classics such as Strictly Ballroom, Romeo and Juliet, Moulin Rouge, Australia, and The Great Gatsby. And it turns out that Jim Sharman, the director and one of the key creative minds behind Rocky Horror, was a key influence on Baz Luhrmann. As an institution, IFC Center is particularly grateful to Mr. Luhrmann for sharing this and volunteering to present the film tonight. It's an extraordinary honor to bring up one of our greatest film artists of world cinema today. Please welcome Baz Luhrmann.
Thank you, John. Thank you. I see two chairs. I won't be using one of them, I think, because I got a bit of a thing on the set of never sitting down, so I've never really got over that. But thanks very much for that lovely introduction. And you're probably right, John. There's a cruel rumor going around that I wanted to present this film because my 8-year-old wanted so many tickets to Comic-Con that I had to do something to make up for it. That is not true. Although he was fantastic today when he took on the head of Marvel Comics and debated some of the pros and cons of what should happen with the company in the future. So I was quite proud of him about that. I did it for a very particular reason. John touched upon it. But when I was very, very young, I guess I was about 20, I was doing all sorts of device theatre in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Australia. And this guy that we'd known about, he was kind of a legend for us, this director that we'd heard about who'd gone to England and at the age of 22, can you imagine it, worked with a composer called Andrew Lloyd Webber, made a musical called Jesus Christ Superstar at the age of 22. And he'd gone on to great success. And he'd had his own theatre company, done the original productions of Hair, and made a film called The Rocky Horror Picture Show. This director's name was Jim Sharman, and he worked with a designer called Brian Thompson. And he was a bit of a mystery guy. Anyway, one day he came out of the audience in a small place called Rockhampton and said, he sort of spoke like that, Baz, you could never really understand what Jim was saying. And he was really, well, I want to come and maybe work with the opera and do some things with the Australian Opera Company. And I was like, that would be good. I would be happy to do that. And from there, he supported my own directorial journey all the way through to where we are today. More interesting, or even more serendipitous, many years later, after I'd done my first theatre productions and was moving into making a theatre company, I hooked up with a young designer from the same drama school I went to called Catherine Martin. And she was guided by a designer who was Brian Thompson, who also designed the Rocky Horror Picture Show. The tag there is that I married her, and she went on to work with me on all the productions we've done. She's kind of difficult to live with. She has 4 Oscars, and it's very difficult to look at someone who slams them down every breakfast like that and then eats a Wheaties like, just saying, as my daughter likes to say. Anyway, just really quickly, because I wanted to do a bit of a preamble before I brought on what I think is a pretty exceptional part of the evening. I wanted to just acknowledge Jim and I wanted to acknowledge him here because what I understood was that Jim went on and he did the musical, and then he did had a little theatre company, and he told me in the theatre company he had this guy that had a little band, and there was a drummer in the band who was terrible, like an absolutely hopeless musician and an even worse drummer, but he was pretty good. He said he wanted to write plays, and he wrote a play called The Unseen Hand, and his name was Sam Shepard. And yeah, some of you acknowledge that because he's a pretty good playwright, really. So then, after The Unseen Hand, it starred a guy called Richard O'Brien, and he had this musical idea, and they're at the Royal Court, and they go upstairs, and they put on this funny little show called, which was a sort of musical send-up of early comics and horror films and Hammer horror films with musical numbers, but it was also sort of confronting issues that they were big deals, like, sexuality, but in a kind of ironic camp way. They did the show at the Royal Court. It was a great success. They wanted to put it in a theatre. They couldn't find a theatre, so they put it into a cinema. So it became the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And then at some point, they went on to make the movie. Short note, they made the movie, and a man bought 20th Century Fox. I think his name was Bloodhorn. And he said, screaming every movie we've ever made here. And he got to the Rocky Horror Picture Show 10 minutes, and he said, stop. Burn that thing. No one should ever see that movie again. So the young guy went, you sure? I mean, it's kind of... No. Burn it. I mean, really. I just spent $100 million buying this place. I can see burn it. So the kid takes the reel, and he goes down to the archives, and he puts it in, and he goes, So he waits about a year, and he screens it around the corner at 12 o'clock at night. Today, as I stand here, it's the longest running motion picture in history. Whoever that young man was, thank you. Because generation after generation after generation has been affected by that unusual, extraordinary alchemy that is both cinema and theatre, and it was a great influence on us. Now, the generations that have been affected because of the extraordinary qualities of it, and I can tell you a bit about it because it's kind of historical for me, but only the people that were really there could really tell you about it. And when I said, look, would it be all right if I hosted a Rocky screening, I had no idea that we would be so lucky as to have not only a cast member, but I think one of the great actors in the world. And so this would be a moment, I think, to welcome the great Susan Sarandon to the stage. Well, you're here, I'll sit with you.
Oh, thanks. Here we are.
Maybe I should ask you a question, Susan, because I've been dying to ask you this. But when did you first ever hear about the Rocky Horror, the play? When did you hear about the play as opposed to the movie?
A friend of mine was cast in the show that the theater company in LA. And so what happened was I went to see her in it. Jamie Donnelly was her name. And I think when Tim came out on stage, it was one of the most unique and electrifying moments that had ever occurred in musicals as far as I was concerned. And I met Tim and I became friends, and actually I went by to say hi to him at one point when they were casting the movie, and I always had this phobia about trying to sing. I mean, I just am so, my dad was a band singer, and I was always told that I could not sing, and my ego was such that I believed that and was terrified. And I remember when I came to New York, for some reason, going up for musicals and just nothing would come out. So anyway, I went to say hi to Tim, and they were casting, and I just came to say hi, you know, and give them a little peck and leave. And they said, "Oh my God, what a great idea! We've never had anybody that could make this part funny. Would you read?" And I said, "Yeah, but I can't really sing." And so, "Well, just read it." And I read it, and I kind of did a, you know, like an extreme version of every ingenue that I'd been playing up until then. That had some kind of inner anger that was really underneath a bitch, you know. But she was this little ingenue. And they thought, "Oh, that's so funny, go ahead, you can't hit." They said, "Can you hit this on the piano, Richard Hartley? Can you hit that? Can you this?" You know, they said, "Please do it." And I was actually supposed to do something else, and of course you can imagine my agents were horrified. But I thought, you know, nobody should spend their entire adult life terrified to even hum. You know, I'll go there, they'll give me drugs or alcohol or something, and I'll get over this, and it'll be very therapeutic, and meanwhile I can hang out with Tim and Nell and all these great people. They didn't give me any of those things, and luckily we spent a lot of time getting the music down ahead of time, and I just apologized throughout the entire process, constantly. And I was the only one that had done film work at that point. Everyone else had done the stage version in many places, but nobody had done film, and Jim hadn't directed a film, I don't think, right? Yeah. And we were in this really uncomfortable, freezing studio in London, outside of London, more than an hour outside of London, and commuting. And it was a very, very inexpensive, it was $1 million they spent to make that. And so it was kind of like the outward bound of filmmaking, you know. And I thought gee, the English are really tough, you know. They can work in freezing weather and underwear, and they don't complain. And then I got pneumonia. Anyway, it was a hard shoot. And when I look at it now, I think, wow, we had more fun than I remember. But it was great to work with Tim, but it was, and Nell, and Pat, and Richard, but it was fast and furious and very, very physically demanding at that time.
You know, Susan, I'm thinking, and I'll just ask a second question, because I know what we're dying to do is really hear from all of you the questions you have. But one that's been rattling around in my mind, as I was on my way here, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and she has a niece, I told you, and the niece is the same age, and completely unprompted, I was coming, and she said, "Oh, you know, she's a little bit hipper than she might be 11, my daughter might be 10, I don't know, I'm not good with numbers, ask the studio, but, you know." Huh?
It's her cousin, not her niece.
Yeah, that would be my wife saying that in the background. She just tends to hang around and side coach me. It's not just numbers I'm a problem with too, it's kind of like blood relatives, you know. But anyway, some vague blood relative who's about 11. But she said to me, seriously, she said, "Look, I'm going to go and see my favourite film." And I said, "What is that?" She said, "The Rocky Horror Picture Show." She had no idea I had any connection with it whatsoever. Right? And I wondered whether you had an opinion, so many generations connect with the film. What is the enduring power that the film has upon the young and continuing generations? Why does it do that?
Don't dream it, be it, I think, is it. You know, at a time when you feel, I mean, I don't know anyone that feels like they're in the center of things at that age. You know, you always feel like an outsider. Everybody, even, you know, in hindsight, the kids that you thought were peaking at 13 probably felt as horrified as you did every day. It's such a hard thing to get through. And I mean, I didn't think of that when we were doing it, but the fan mail and the responses and the stories that I get of people either embracing their, you know, whatever about them is special and at the same time therefore alienates other people, or whether or not there's some kind of, you know, fluidity in terms of gender, or whether or not it's that you're in a place that you feel is really controlling and, you know, restricting. somehow the Rocky Horror Show, there was a community, especially in the beginning, a really strong community of people that would go and see lots of other kids that accepted. It's kind of like the junior Burning Man, you know, anybody that came was accepted, and you could dress up and throw things at the screen and answer, and kind of like a mass or something. But it definitely, I was saying to Baz that later on I got mail from people after Thelma and Louise saying, Rocky Horror Show really awakened me and gave me strength, but after I saw Thelma and Louise, I left town. I thought that was really, you know, I never would have thought of the connection of those two films, but Thelma and Louise saying, you know, don't settle. But I guess the thing that kind of set it up was Rocky Horror Show. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of. Halloween all the time. So I guess that's it, you know, that it's still so popular and that people like it.
I mean, I think it's true. I see it in my young blood relative. I don't make a mistake again. Who wants to hear a voice coming out of the darkness? You got it wrong. She's your niece. And she's 13. But I think that is true. I think for me. But for that young girl, that I can see her evolving like that. And she's going, who am I? What am I? And that film in a musical, ironic, fun, inclusive way allows everyone to join the club of it's okay to be different and weird and out there in a kind of wacky musical horror film. But, you know, do you think this is a good moment for us to ask people in the audience to ask us questions?
Absolutely. I'm always interested in questions from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, is there anyone who has a question? Great. It's an early night, Susan. Let's go get a drink. Wow. Yes, lucky. All right. How about this? Yes. Do we have another mic? Well, all right. You can project. What's your name?
Melissa.
Hi, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Something I just noticed tonight watching this is I'm a big fan of Moulin Rouge, and I noticed, you know, as Tim Curry character is dying, you have Rocky kind of holding over him. I just noticed the parallel between Moulin Rouge when Satine is dying and Christian is holding her and the curtains around. I mean, is that something you would consider a direct influence or more just a coincidence? Or there's a couple of moments that, you know, yourself that.
Do you know, I think that Jim, Rocky, Jim's aesthetic, Brian, they belonged, what they were doing was, interestingly enough, is reaching back to old cinema and inventing it and playing with it in a new and kind of fresh and edgy way. And I think that they reached back to a cinema that was quite a theatrical cinema language. You know, the movies of the 30s and the 40s, whether they were Hammer horror or they were musicals, they were a language where the audience understood that they were participating with the screen. And he was quite organic about that. Later on, we were quite serious about it. So I note, and I might be wrong, but the whole red curtain, the whole idea that you're let in on the idea that you're watching a movie and in on the irony of it. It's a two-pronged attack. There's two experiences. You both participate and observe it. So to a certain degree, yes, absolutely, it's been an influence. And Jim and Brian and all that, we just thought that was the coolest thing in the world, death to naturalism. I mean, I grew up around psychological drama and doing sort of first reality stuff, you know, so, and Brecht and all of that. So the theatricality of it, yes, it was definitely a direct influence. Anyone else with, yes?
Hi, I'm currently producing a documentary called Rocky Horror Saved My Life. I think that I'd like to know, how did Rocky Horror really change or affect the course of your lives, both of you?
Susan's got to answer that one. I'm fascinated by that one for you.
Well, it didn't do anything for a long time because it just didn't exist. You know, it had a long gestation period. And then I find that people have a tendency, journalists have a tendency always to ask me questions that put me on the defensive. Like they expect me to want to disown the Rocky Horror Show for some reason. I don't know if it's because I'm running around half-dressed or I'm not sure why, but I think now, you know, maybe it's earned some kind of respectability, but certainly in the beginning, It was kind of like what happened when I started championing ping pong. They were like, "Excuse me, what did you do? You know, where did that film come from, and what is that?" And because I guess I was really the only person that anybody knew, you know, so a lot of it went on me, and because you know, I don't think, unless you were in LA, I don't even know how long the show ran. Did it run in New York, the actual theater production? I mean, I remember it in LA, but I didn't see it in New York, and so it didn't reach that many people in the theater. So when the film came out, it was, people couldn't, you know, and then they kind of blamed me. But I even then, I thought, this is great, you know, how fabulous. And how did it affect my life? I don't know. I mean, I did have parents. I was telling Baz that I had parents that wrote me letters threatening me, telling me to tell their kids to leave their Rocky Horror Show costumes at home before they went to college, or they were getting cut off. And so I did have a little bit of a fantasy of all these disgruntled suburban parents having to drive their kids to the cinema at midnight, you know, and that was what was going to take me down at some point. Not anything to do with politics, just really like, I can't do this one more time. Give up my weekend for my... Anyway, so it could be my legacy. Who knows? It could be kind of interesting.
I think Susan's got an amazing point, just to add to that on a technical level. My understanding is, just from a cursory glance at the web, is that it was reviled critically when it came out. And it's pretty much been reviled a lot from the odd kind of heavy intellectual who sort of weighs in on it. Now, you've got to counter that with the fact that it was, I think in 2005, the Library of Congress, what's that when they sign a piece of culture up as significant? What's that called? It's exactly. And it was registered nationally by the Library of Congress because of its cultural significance and effect upon culture. And you see, that'd be my own take on things. I'm much more interested in the things that affect culture in an enduring way, not how they're particularly received at the time. Because if you start playing that game, well, a guy called Shakespeare would have been, he was reviled, by the way, by the critic. Reviled. I mean, Rocky got off lightly, right? And he's done all right. So I think the fact that Congress has said, you know, say what you like, our friends the critics, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's some really illuminating criticism out there, but clearly, forget all that. It's had an enduring and continuing effect upon culture.
It's been in a lot of films too. I wonder how many films.
That's what
A film within a film. I'm not right, but a few films. Because I'm always having to sign forms saying it's all right if it's in the movie. So I know somewhere it's out there in a number of movies yet. Still.
Well, I re-looked at Fame recently to check something for something I'm working on. And it's in there, and I was reminded, apart from the fact that I was reminded that Fame, which I thought was kind of a lovely pop cultural film, where I got some really, films in those times that seemed to be broad entertainments, had a lot more shocking issues in them. You would be shocked what's in Saturday Night Fever. Shocked. I guarantee you. There's a gang rape in that, and the lead actor is sitting in the car at the time and turns and says something I can't repeat in the cinema afterwards. That guy's name's John Travolta. You know, you'd be shocked. In Fame, and, you know, there's a child molested in it. It's a really, I thought it was like people leaping on top of taxis. But what I remember is, for me as a young person, what an influence. I mean, oh, Fame, wow. I mean, New York, that's where you want to be, right? And in that, the two young couple that get together, they go to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show, probably here, around the corner, and they go through the whole ritual. And as a young person, I remember thinking, yeah, New York, it's cool. I want to be there. You know? But yeah, it's been in a lot. So it's.
I think it's in Wallflower too.
Yeah.
Recently.
So it's beyond a film.
Hi.
Hi, what's your name?
My name's Margaret. Thank you very much for all of your, I'm just going to use the word liberationist because you're just enough older than I am, performances. And from Bill Durham to White Palace to Thelma and Louise. And about 2 weeks ago, we were in the same restaurant, and it wasn't 100% positive it was you. But then my boyfriend saw you smile and said it was definitely you. I won't say where it was. So when you were saying about humming, I think that went with all of it. In other words, when you take whatever that fear was and use it in all those parts, there's no other performer I can think of in my generation, our generation, that did quite that kind of busting out. So
Thank you. I hope I keep busting out. Gonna keep. There's still a lot of things I'm afraid of, so I have lots of things to work with yet. Did I keep any souvenir from the film? Yeah, I think I had. The corset or something for a while. Trying to think. They gave us a garter belt at one point for some anniversary that I think is still around too. But it was a very no frills experience. In fact, on top of everything else, the gal that was helping me dress and everything set my trailer on fire, and I lost a lot of my own clothes that I never got reimbursed. Come to think of it, I don't have, just the stuff that's happened, kind of afterwards. Yeah, but you can buy those outfits a lot of places. My little outfit I see, though, everyone dressed in them, so they must be pretty easy to find, I guess.
Sue Blaine designed the show and was an Aussie, but what I know is that most of the costumes and a lot of the props from the theatre show, they just used in the movie. Because Jim had never made a movie before, they had such a low budget. They just thought that's how you did it. You just sort of dragged it along and then they did other costumes and things. But Susan, I got to ask, because I shouldn't, because everyone else don't ask questions, but I'm dying to ask, just thinking of costume, I see mine's falling apart. When you made it, and it was harsh to make, and, cold, you lost all your clothes in a tragic fire, left only with a corset to face the world. But in all seriousness, it must have been a great effort, and one of those kind of, this is crazy, and you do it, and then it gets buried. What was the feeling like before it had been rebirthed? I mean, did you just think, well, that was so crazy, no wonder it didn't take off, or did you rationalize it?
No. I mean, but I don't think that way. I mean, I was really happy having, it was so difficult for me to get through some of the parts of it, in terms of the singing, that I felt that I'd accomplished everything that I wanted to accomplish. Plus, it brought me, closer to Tim, and Nell for a while was in New York, which was great. Patty was in Richard Woods. But, so I was satisfied. I had gotten a lot from it, I learned pretty early on to not look for satisfaction with what happens afterwards, because it just breaks your heart if you look at it that way. You know how you toil away even more as a director. You spend years on something, and then, the studio decides to, release it for 3 days or something and pulls it, or just is bad planning or bad, there's so many ways for them to fuck it up. So you just learn really, really early on to be so grateful for the experience of making it, and the friends that you make, and what you learn, and how you work from fear to someplace that's fairly stable, and so it seemed to make sense. I had been to Charlie Bluhdorn's house, actually, because I was going out with Louis Malle, and he had a gold-plated toilet that was like a throne. So I wasn't that surprised. I knew he was a little, I had been around him a little bit, and, these guys that run these studios, they're not like us. So, and they're still not like us. So, you know, it wasn't surprising to me, but I was really happy when it started popping up. That was just the strangest phenomenon ever.
I think it's hard to forget, it's easy to forget just how, like now, but then, that film, and you know, the lead character's kind of in suspenders and is a transsexual from Transylvania, singing, you know what I mean, like just how kind of out there it would have seemed, and how wonderful it is that it found its, I mean, it gives you hope.
Well, and also at that point there wasn't this Second Life. Films that don't get supported and don't get a decent release, you can find them now in other places so easily, but that wasn't true then. So yeah, they were so buried. Yeah. I had no idea she was looked upon as being slutty. I'm shocked.
Me neither, actually.
No, I thought she was just suffering from having to be smarter than him, but always being nice, as girls are supposed to be, and had this underlying anger that this guy was such a jerk, and so, you know, and also she was sitting on some lust of some sort. But I'm really sorry that you made her into a slut in your mind. I'm gonna quit while I'm ahead.
That's entertainment.
I just want to thank you for the mini cinema Friday nights in Unionville on Long Island. So many good memories. I think this is one of my favorite 8-tracks in my car.
Wow.
Did you dress up?
I was one throwing the rice and water guns and so forth, and I didn't dress up. A different set of Jaws. I don't remember that from the original poster. Was it on there?
Yeah.
A different word. Different set of
Oh.
Jaws.
No, I don't.
I don't think so.
Is
Was
that
it?
because it was released at the same time as Jaws? Is that why? Right. There we go. That would have been some marketing idea for Fox, yeah. Stephen over here, Jim over there. A different set of Jaws.
Hi, I'm Daryl Nix. Also an Aussie New Yorker, so I'm thrilled to be in the room with yourself, Baz, you, Catherine, and with you, Lisa, as well. I have a question for you, and this is, I'd like to get both your perspectives. Would a remake be abhorrent? You know, it's such a...
I think the spirit of the fact that there was no money and it had been in the theater for so long, and these people were, you know, had figured everything out, and he was, there's something about being young and hungry and not having a huge budget to, I mean, it was just done in a spirit, and I think that kind of, you can see it on the screen, and I think that adds to this encouragement of you to make art out of whatever it is that you have. And if it was really done with a big budget and very glossy, and I mean, even when they tried to redo the stage show, you know, it just wasn't dirty enough.
You know what? There's a pretty interesting answer to that. Jim told me they did do a sequel with a lot of money called Shock Treatment. And he said, and it was terrible.
They asked me to do it,
Well,
and I didn't do it.
Good call. No, but he, you know, Jim was really clear about that. Like, I think what he describes, and he's right, particular to this, and particular to its success, is that the absolute one-off alchemy. Like, Jim's got this long letter he sent to me. I emailed him about this. It's really beautiful. I wish I had time to read it, but I can't read. And it will go horribly wrong. And he mentions Susan in an intimate way on the set of Atlantic. And I checked with you if that was true. Preparing for a role was. Now you want to hear it, right? But he does say, I mean, he went on to say, well, don't forget that one of the things about it is that we were all young. I mean, they were all mid-20s. You know, and it was in a period when young was king. It was this new period where to be young, you were king. And so 25, and you know, the way they made it, I think it, I mean, he goes on to say it's not very, there are a lot of steps that are out of time. It's like imperfect. And that's where the human quality in it is so lively. And I think Susan's absolutely right. the nature of that is if you go and sort of do a perfect multi-million-dollar version, you'd be better off doing some other kind of interpretation of it. I think that's legitimate, you know. Do Rocky the Opera or something, you know. But any other?
I've seen a lot of different kinds of productions on stage because they invite me, and I saw one on Long Island City, or a special school there for kids that had all kinds of different brains, you know, autistic and other things, doing the Rocky Horror Show. That was pretty interesting. And also I've seen it, and a girl had the lead, had Tim's part in that. And their questions, I saw the rehearsal, the dress rehearsal, and I'm not sure that they understood who I was, but they were still asking me questions. But it's a very interesting. There's something about the structure of it and the simplicity of it that lends itself to different kinds of people connecting with it.
So the film version of Rocky Horror Picture Show is almost 4 years old. It features lots of gender fluidity. The guests, the Transylvanian guests, have a lot of different. They're different abled, different races, different genders. 40 years on, do you think that we have gained ground or lost ground, audience-wise, and also in terms of producer courage in making this type of film?
So many different groups you're talking about. I think that we definitely have made progress in terms of some fluidity, and if you haven't seen Transparent, I've seen a few episodes of that, and that's amazing. I'm about to do a movie about a girl, 16-year-old girl that's going to transition. So, I mean, it's with the intention of having a dialogue that's in the present, that's, you know, try to normalize it. I hate the word normal, but, so I think in that sense we are. I don't think in terms of producers. I don't think in terms of the business, no. I think if anything, the banker head has become more and more, is stronger, and it's all decided by, you know, who you cast, who's got how many followers, and what's your this queue and that queue, and there's very few instances, especially if it goes over $2 million budget or something, where you, even with the tiny films, where you can cast somebody that's just the right person, let alone a story that you want to tell that isn't, you know, it's that funny thing of we love it, we love it, we love it, now let's change it. And, you know, does it have to be that gay? Does it really have to be a suicide? You know, all the major elements that are in something initially, and then they just get nervous, right? And so you get away with murder. I don't know how you do it. You do all kinds of
I was trained by Jim.
stuff.
Yeah.
But you've made money, and that's why they trust you to make money.
No, somebody donated me this lovely jacket. Actually, I thought you hit a really, really important point, and I think Susan does. Look, and something I'm working on, I'm going back to a lot of the films made in this period, not because of Rocky, but I've been meticulously going through them. You know that example I gave you about Saturday Night Fever or Fame? I mean, honestly, I said to my 10-year-old, darling, you should see Fame, because she's interested in, you know, schools where they dance and things like that. I went back, I realised then that those films that we grew up with, just, you know, I mean, forget The Godfather and, you know, like films that were being made there, the actual, the social confrontation in them, and yet they were profoundly entertaining, and they were broad. They were films that were reaching very broadly. I realised that there has been a massive and kind of almost very subtle, invisible shift into that thing you talk. Does it have to be? Couldn't it be? What's interesting is that there's a greater liberation, I think, in some television, in cable television. There's a greater freedom in the writing there. That's where you see liberation. And in film, yes, I can see that.
Documentaries, I think. There's been an amazing public switch in terms of actually seeing documentaries as entertainment, and there's so many good ones with all these little cameras that people can now use. There's a lot of interesting films being done, but distribution is the question, I think, now.
Yes. I mean, I think it's a bigger subject. I'm not shirking it, but it's a really big subject. We'll get off track on it, which is basically about who buys tickets to the cinema. You know, I can remember we had a little cinema when I was growing up in a tiny country town. And, you know, you have to remember, everybody went to the movies, and event cinema meant, you know, there were things that children went to and families went to, but there are also things that all adults went to. There's not a lot of broad-based cinema that all adults go to. Who buys tickets to the movies? What is the big movie buying force? I mean, you know, Comic-Con, fantastic, but there's a reason why it's so absolutely potent. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, that kind of adult... I do long for those big... They're great, smaller adult films, but I really long for those big, you know, subjects that are done on a big scale that can pay their price because a big audience goes to see them, and they're not necessarily, you know, narrowed down. And there were more of them, I think. I mean, maybe I'm just starting to sound a little bit older, but I think there were more of them when I was growing up. Yes.
Me? Hi, my name is Anna Maria. I'm from Iceland. And I saw Rocky Horror for the first time when I was in kindergarten. I think I watched it like 2 or 3 times a day for years. And one of the reasons I moved to New York was to be in Fame. And I'm in the Actors Studio Drama School right now. And
Good for you. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
I love Iceland, by the way.
Thank you so much. I love it too. I'm here with four girls from Iceland. And Romeo and Juliet is one of my favorite movies, and my heart is pounding. I really wanted to ask you, Rocky Horror is my favorite movie in my life. And
What did you think was so interesting when you were that little and you were watching it compulsively?
wow, I was made a video cassette that was like taped off another tape, and it had like a Xerox cover, and there was a female director, a theater director, that gave it to me because I loved it, and me and my childhood friend, who's also an actress now, we like stole, ég stalst til að horfa á hana. We sneaked. We weren't supposed to see it, but we like watched it, and then like I confessed, and we all confessed, and we were like, this is my favorite movie in the world. And they like Xeroxed the front paper, and they had like highlighting pens with pink, the lips, and like I think
Did you dress up?
Yes, we dressed up and we put on makeup and we knew the dances. I know, like, I think every single word in the movie. and I've directed also, like, there is a film festival in Iceland, and once we had a midnight show, and I directed a little bit of, like, we played in front, and we had the popcorn, and we had the flashlight. We didn't have the laser thing. I don't know, it was unlike anything I had ever seen. And it was so provoking, and it opened my eyes to so many dimensions of life. And maybe it was too much sexuality. I was poor, I don't know. I didn't understand most of it. Plus, like, I didn't speak English. I fast forwarded over the professor guy. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about.
I find that a lot of my films that would work better in another language. There are some that, like, The Hunger in German is so hot.
But my question for you is, do you have a favorite song? Or
I have a favorite what?
Song or a scene?
From that?
From Rocky Horror.
Yeah, I like the first one, and, you know, There's a Light I find soothing. I like that one. I mean, of mine, you know. Yeah. That one. I mean, I couldn't sing any of Tim's stuff because you have to be so gifted. He was such a great performer.
Do you have a favorite song or a scene?
Sure, I have a favorite song, but I'm just trying to absorb everything you just did then. which is, I mean, either, I don't know, you've been rehearsing it for months and it's a performance, or we're the luckiest people in the world, because that is the absolute summation of the value and the meaning of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and that is a beautiful story. So we're the lucky ones here. And I like the time warp. Hey. Maybe last couple, I guess. Yeah, we'll go there and then we'll come here.
So these are just, I've kind of got two questions, and I sneak it, but they're small. So, the first one is, was there any major editorial or any difference from when it was first released until then when it was re-released as the Midnight Show? Was there anything altered?
Not to my knowledge, no.
No, and I'm sure Jim would have told me, and I'm sure not. Because my understanding was, we got to track down the story about the kid. I mean, I'm probably, as you know, I'm a social realist director, so when I tell stories, they're totally accurate. But maybe I just imagine, I have read that I was like a junior executive, or someone saw it later on and went, look, and did the deal about screening at 12 o'clock. So I know they didn't have any money. So the idea of going back into the edit, I mean, once you, even when it was optical sound, once you've done that, no. So it's not like they went like, you know.
The one thing that was different from what was intended was the whole film was supposed to be in black and white until you see Tim's lips as he's coming down the elevator, which would have been fantastic. So you kind of like the Wizard of Oz, you know, and once he comes down. So they shot it with the intention of the whole church scene, whatever, I can't remember, goes on in the beginning, as being all black and white, and then everything would be black and white, and you would get this pop of color, and you were into his arrival. And they didn't do it because they said it was too expensive, and so that was something that didn't happen the way that they hoped. And I was told that there were some gay guys that were at Fox that started feeding it to these art gay cinemas. Those were the first places that it really attracted people. And built up. And then later on I was told, you know, now we don't have so many art cinemas, little tiny independently owned cinemas. There used to be more of a network of them, and I was told that it really managed to help keep them alive for many years, because they knew they could count on selling out those performances every week when they were showing some foreign language film or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the second one's a very short one. It's just for you, Susan. I've got one very important question. How did you keep that newspaper on your head during the weird selection? I've tried that in New York writing, it does not work.
Well, that's a secret. Which maybe I'll tell you later.
Hi. So, thank you very much for your work with Rocky Horror. I'm also working on the Rocky Horror Save My Life documentary, and Rocky Horror really did save my life. Were it not for me going to Rocky Horror 20-odd years ago, I wouldn't have any of the friends I have now, and I wouldn't have my wife, I wouldn't have my baby, wouldn't exist. It's been just mind-blowing the trip that I've been on because of this little movie that was made in the 70s.
Wow. What are your kids' names?
Zoe.
Zoe.
Is the one. And she's fantastic. Today she said the words Rocky Horror.
That's a sweet story.
It's been 40 years almost. Next year will be the 40th anniversary. There's talk about there being a convention in New York. Would that be something you'd be interested in attending? Would you consider attending a convention? When's the last convention you attended?
Are you talking to me? I live a few blocks away, you know. I'm down, if I'm in New York, I would be interested in going. I mean, I'm very proud to have been part of it. And I think that it has had such positive, as you say, that I mean, I'm very aware, as somebody who does this for a living, of taking responsibility for what happens when you're in a movie and people see it and what they leave with. And because I think that films, you know, they constantly completely strengthen racism, sexism, ageism, all of those things, that nobody pays any attention to what they're reinforcing time and time again. So I'm very happy when a film that I'm in, I'm trying to be careful. You never know if a film's going to turn out well or not. I mean, there's so many more ways for a film to go wrong than right. And but you can at least know what the intention and what the dialogue around that film is going to be, and what stereotypes it challenges or reinforces, and what it says, and what it tells a person to leave with at the end. Or, I love it when I go to see a movie with my kids and we have really heated debates afterwards. I think that's the best thing cinema can do. So I'm pleased that the Rocky Horror Show has saved your life and given you a child. I never would have anticipated that. And I'd be happy to hear things. I mean, I'm really curious. I've been sent some papers that have been done on the Rocky Horror Show, but nobody has ever asked some of those questions. They've talked about it just from an outside point of view, but they've never really identified what happens and why that happens. So I'm happy that, if there are those stories, that's great.
We've gotten over 300 interviews with fans across the country, around the world. It's really, really great stories that we've heard from people who, were it not for this little movie, their lives would be completely different. And just some people, their lives wouldn't exist.
Wow. Well, I was telling Baz that when I was in LA doing Anywhere But Here, Natalie Portman was about 16 or 17, and she'd never been, Thora Birch had never been, and my daughter was even younger, and she'd never been. And we went in LA, and up on stage, so they knew we were coming, and so I met the people that were in front of the screen acting out, and they were second generation. Their parents had done it and had met doing it, and now they were doing it, and I felt like Helen Hayes or something. So unfucking believable. It's like, what a family tradition to pass on, to learn that, to do the stage thing for the Rocky Horror Show. And that blew my mind. I mean, that was really impressive. So it probably will be my legacy. That'll be the thing that I'll be remembered for, maybe. But thanks for, you can find me, I'm sure.
I wonder if that's a good moment to, well, first of all, I don't think rock horror is a phenomenon, a cultural phenomenon, but Susan Sarandon will be remembered for many, many other extraordinary and remarkable performances. And
thank you.
Really. I was just extremely touched and pleased and thrilled, because I organised this little moment really for Jim and for my 13-year-old blood relative who looks like she's going to be bringing a whole new generation to your event, and for the tickets for my 8-year-old. But really, I had no idea that Susan would join and think enough of it to make the effort to participate in it, and I'm personally.
I love that you asked me, and it's always good to see you. And I'd love that. I mean, there's just nobody that's punching things around the way you are. It's just completely using cinema the way it should be used, and I'm happy publicly. And your wife does make fabulous, fabulous visuals.
She just said, she's not just a voice. Anyway, what a great little moment it's been, and unexpected, and it only really happens because of all of you, the audience. So thank you very much, and thank you for having us.
Thank you.